This is a 2022 redistricting study. The study does not imply that this is on board for an immediate change. We're just taking a look at numbers, discovering some things that we have going in the community, et cetera, et cetera. This is not something that is going to happen tomorrow. It is something that we're discussing to kind of discover what's happening in our community.
This is for information only today. However, we would ask that the board be prepared to make a decision prior to the February board meeting and hopefully January board meeting. But we have an extensive public input component to this that we'll show you at the end. So it's a very comprehensive review. It's not a complete redistricting. It's the existing boundaries and adjustments within those boundaries as we've seen growth in the West End and in the Heights.
And the reason for the January timeline is we start registering students for classes in February and March. And so we want families to be able to be aware of where they would be attending school in subsequent years so that we are registering them for the correct schools.
Okay, I'm ready. So I want to appreciate your time and the opportunity to present tonight. I'm here to give a presentation on the recommendations for boundary changes that the staff would like you to consider for the following school year. As I said, I am Matthew Cropper with Cropper GIS Consulting. We are a K-12 planning firm, and our specialty is just this kind of work, school redistricting work. We do this work all over the country. We also do demographic studies and facility planning, but we are here to talk particularly about school redistricting and boundaries. We've worked with districts all over, including across the state of Montana. And so we bring a lot of perspectives on what other districts have done and challenges they have faced and how they have tackled some of those challenges, as well as best practices. And we also bring the technology so that we can make accurate, informed decisions and provide data that helps inform you in an accurate and efficient manner as you go through this important process. So why are we here? We are here because the district in 2017 implemented new school boundaries to align your schools as K-5, 6-8, and 9-12 schools. You also opened 2 new middle schools, Medicine Crow and Ben Steele. Since that has occurred, the district is continuing to be impacted by growth. There has been a lot of extensive growth on the West End, in particular of the district. And that has caused further imbalances in utilization of enrollment as that growth continues out on the West End in particular. So the objective of this process was to examine all the boundaries, elementary, middle, high school, and look at how can we provide some relief to those schools while aligning with several other components of criteria. So overall, we're hired to explore and develop options, working with the administration and also enabling the public to give some input after this process, after the recommendation is delivered. Working on developing options and recommendations for all school levels that best meet the district's redistricting criteria, and most importantly, address imbalances in utilization of your schools. And in particular, those schools on the West End are the ones that we're seeing that are having the greatest pressures and overutilization. The implementation of these board-approved changes is expected to occur in fall 2023. That's what is being asked the board to consider. And we're asking that the board approve a plan no later than February 2023 so that the district can start working through implementing changes in the boundaries. This includes routing buses, making changes to the bus routing, looking at staffing, and also making sure that you notify all the families and parents once a plan is approved. So I want to talk a little bit about the guidelines, guiding principles, and criteria. When we first started working with you back in 2014, the district approved a set of criteria and guidelines to follow when redistricting. And these are basically what we see in most school districts. They follow best practices. And these are basically the rules that you follow when you start evaluating if a line should move one way or the other. The best plan is going to be one that adheres to these criteria as best as possible as a whole. It doesn't focus solely on one element of the criteria, but looking at all of the criteria. And so these include to minimize the impact on students. So try to move as few students as possible when we're doing this process. Balanced building utilization, that's certainly a key point here. Look at contiguous boundaries. And so this is trying to make a zone around each school that's contiguous, not have satellite areas. So this has been a challenge in Billings because you have most of your schools are within the city area, but you look west of Shiloh, you don't have much in terms of school capacity. But you can, if you look west of Shiloh and look at housing, you could see that there's a lot of homes, a lot of residential subdivisions, and neighborhoods have been developed. And so we are seeing a need to create some satellite areas to try to provide relief to schools on the west end and provide more students to schools that are closer into town that have available capacity. We also want to make sure that we're not splitting identifiable community components. So what we're saying here is don't draw the line down a residential subdivision. Don't draw the line down a neighborhood street where there may be communities on both sides of the street that identify with each other and communicate and have friends and they barbecue on the weekends and those kinds of things. We want to make sure that if we move an area that it moves together and try not to split in neighborhoods into different parts. We want to maximize transportation efficiency and walkability whenever possible. Try to maximize the safety of students by drawing lines around along major roads and rivers and railroads, trying to minimize the number of times students may have to cross over those types of geographic features. So maximize also the socioeconomic diversity of schools with any redistricting change. Be mindful of some of the demographic implications and impacts on schools as we look at making changes. We want to look at feeder patterns. So we want to be mindful of how much of an elementary school feeds to a middle school and how much of that middle feeds to a high school. So we want to try to avoid very small splits if at all possible. And there are some times where you may have to split a school, and the perfect scenario, if you do have to do that, is to have it be a more balanced split. There are other scenarios or cases where we're seeing high growth areas that have been rezoned to a school that right now represents a small split, but we know there's going to be a lot of students coming into this area, any particular area, because of it's an area that has a lot of platted and approved homes that are being built right now. So there's different things that we're being mindful of, and that's being proactive for future potential growth, if at all possible. So looking at where growth is, where the developments are being built and that are approved, and be proactive as possible and anticipating students coming out of those developments when they are fully built out. So as Brenda mentioned, over the course of the last 4 to 5 months, we've been working with the district, the central office administrators, to review school utilization and develop a series of options. These options have been modified, and different iterations of the maps have been created as the district takes the work that we've done to other staff that she mentioned, the principals at the 3 levels to get input, and then also other central office staff members to get some input from them on what they think on the maps. And so there has been a series of vetting and review done by the district before we got to this point, and leading to this recommendation. I should note that we've also had collected, as we work through this, information regarding location and size of future residential developments. We have them, they're on the map, and the county has a map that shows where they are and how many units are being developed. And we've studied that data and trying to be as proactive as possible. So that's part of what we have studied as we work through this recommendation. So tonight, the recommended plan is being presented as a result of this work. It's important to note that this is still a draft, so nothing is final until the board approves a plan. After this, we are opening. There's a general feedback form that's going to go live within a day or two of this presentation, and then the public is asked to give us input that we will study as well as with the district administrators. The district is requesting that the board approve this plan no later than February of next year. So, because they're looking at an implementation date of changes to be effective next fall, 2023. One important note to make is that the administration is recommending that the board consider grandfathering any student who is impacted to remain at their current school if they choose. So if there are any students who are impacted as a result of these changes, they have the option to stay at their current existing school. There are some caveats to that, in that those if they do choose to stay at their school, they do have to get their own transportation to the school. The district will not transport them, and it only applies to students who are impacted at the particular level that they're in. So if you're in an elementary age or in elementary school and you're impacted, you have the option to stay through elementary. But if you are impacted at middle as well, you do have to go to the reassigned middle school when that time comes. And same thing for middle to high school. But grandfathering is just another measure that the district is recommending to the board, and the board consider to further reduce the impact on families who are already in the system and want to finish out at the school that they're currently at. So this is a map of the current zones, the elementary school zones, and I'm going to toggle over to the recommendation, and I also have some interactive map that I can show to give you a little more detail. But this is the recommendation, and so you could see that in particular, the most of the change that is being recommended occurs in the west of Shiloh. There's a lot of movement along Shiloh, east and west of that, trying to provide some relief and balance to the schools in town and some of the schools out further west. If you look at this map, and we also have a handout that is accompanied with this that the board and the public can also look at details, but you'll see the black outline represents the current boundaries, and the background color represents the option. I have a zoomed in area so you could see some of the areas that we're looking at moving. This area out west used to all be around Ben Steele, used to all be Meadowlark Elementary. Meadowlark is currently overcrowded and it needs capacity relief because it basically picked up all of the new construction on the west end. So we are looking at having Meadowlark, some of communities that currently go to Meadowlark go to other schools closer in town, such as Miles Avenue and Big Sky. And there are also other adjustments from in order to make everything balance. What we call a domino effect starts to happen. So we start to move students into one school, but then that school has too many students, and we need to make a sort of a domino shift, another tiered adjustment to balance out the utilization. So you could see that there are areas that of Boulder that do go to Poly Drive, and we're looking at proximity, trying to make sure that students are close to the school that they're being considered for realignment to. Even though they may be closer to another school, we're trying to make sure that we balance all of our utilization while still looking at the other criteria. Some of Poly Drive goes to Rose Park. And then some of Rose Park goes to Highlands, and so it does sort of shift to the east in terms of the way all of the schools in this town are extending further west to pick up students to try to balance out the utilization of these schools. And we have an interactive map. It's going to be available to the public. It's called croppermap.com/Billings redistricting. And this is a good site to be able to really see more detail about changes that are being considered. You'll see, maybe if you turn this on a phone, you may not have your little layer list on the left. You'll see a little white arrow that you can click on, and it pulls over some options. And if you click on view school boundaries, it shows you the current elementary and then the recommended elementary. And then for this, you could see that it shows you, if you could toggle back and forth, you could start to see how they differ from area to area. Also, members of the public can type in an address where they live. And if you type in an address, it will tell you in a red notification or a green notification if that address was impacted by the recommended option. It tells you where the current zoning is for elementary, middle, high, and where the middle school and high school current and recommended zones are for all three levels. So if you are not impacted as part of the redistricting, you'll see a green notification that says this address is not impacted by the recommended options. So this is something that members of the public can use to kind of get a better understanding of how they may be impacted, and you can look around and look at the different options, the different levels, and how they change from current to recommended. We also looked at middle schools. One of the primary drivers with this was trying to provide relief to Ben Steele Middle, which is overcrowded, and Will James and Lewis and Clark have capacity. There are also some adjustments up between Castle Rock and Medicine Crow that are being recommended. So these are your current boundaries. And if I turn on the recommendation, you could see that a K-8 district in the north that was in Castle Rock is in Medicine Crow in this particular map. And then Ben Steele does some area south of Will James that's currently Ben Steele around Central Heights. That goes into Will James. But then that domino effect starts, you see some residuals of the domino effect, and that in order for Will James to take enough students from Ben Steele, Will James has to send some further east into Lewis and Clark. And so there are some adjustments that are made so that Ben Steele goes to some area to Will James, and then Will James sends some to Lewis and Clark, and then Lewis and Clark sends some to Riverside.
Matt, can you make the maps a little bit bigger?
Sure, I can.
We can focus in on the new zones with the existing black line maps. It just helps as reference points.
Sure. So this is the, let's see here. So this is the area that we are looking at south around Big Sky. Elementary school is an area that's currently, if I turn on the current boundaries, you can see it's Ben Steele, and I'll make this transparent so that we could see the full thing. So this is the area that's currently Ben Steele, and if I turn on the hybrid, you could see more streets. So the 32nd and Shiloh, and then if you look at the recommendation, this area becomes Will James, and if you look to the northeast of the current Will James zone, there's an area around Poly that would go to Lewis and Clark. And then also with north of Rimrock, an area that was in Will James would feed into Lewis and Clark Middle School. And I like to just toggle them back and forth and take a look at how they change. And you can sort of see the changes in colors. Around Burlington was Will James, but in this recommendation, areas around Burlington Elementary are recommended to go to Lewis and Clark to balance out utilization among all the middle schools in this area. And then if you look further,
Matt, again, just share with our board and our public that this will be an interactive web that parents or the public or trustees or anyone can go in and toggle back and forth. So you can see how the boundaries change and the impacts. And then one of the neatest features is for anybody to click on their address and see just exactly what type of impact that's going to have. Thank you, Matt.
Correct. And then you could see how the current Lewis and Clark zone follows along 27th Street. And then the recommendation, it does go west of 27th over to Virginia and to Virginia and Grand in order to some students are going from Lewis and Clark to Riverside around McKinley Elementary to give a better balance of utilization among all the schools down here in town. And then up north is the current middle school boundaries. I believe it's the independent K-8 district in the north.
Correct.
And that is the area that is currently in Castle Rock Middle, but in the recommendation, the recommendation is to have the independent K-8 district or the elementary district feed into Medicine Crow Middle School for 6th through 8th grades. So looking at high school, high schools have, trying to keep the impact at a minimum when we make these changes. But if you look at high schools, you could see we have your 3 zones here. And then in the recommendation, we make an adjustment that basically takes the other K-8 district in the south that's currently zoned to West High School. Yes, to West High School. And that ends up going to senior in this particular recommendation. So if I zoom in, you could see the area that's here, that's all yellow, is south of your district. And then in the recommendation, this all turns blue. Really, both sides of 90 would feed into senior in order to give the relief to West that West needs. And we do have maps, detailed maps available online, as well as the online interactive map for members of the public to be able to see more details of this and see if and how they may be impacted as a result of this recommendation. And so you do cover a lot of area, and sometimes it's hard to map out data for Billings because it's such a large geographic area. But with the interactive map and some of these more detailed maps, you should be able to zoom in and get a better, clear understanding of how you may be impacted. So along with the map changes, we've been looking at statistics as we go. Different things that we're looking at is the capacity of the schools, what the current enrollment of the schools are, and then what it would be with the recommendation. You could see as you look at this, the schools that I always look for are, first off, looking at the district average utilization. So overall, if all of your elementary students went to you combined all your elementary seats into one spot, and all your elementary kids went to that one spot, your district would be operating about 88% utilized. So that's all of your capacity compared to all of the enrollment of your elementary schools. And so 88% is kind of the number that we look at, trying to look at maybe as an objective to try to get something close, a targeted number that we're looking for. I look at schools that are over 100%. That's the first thing I like to look at. And you can see Boulder's at 120, Meadowlark is at 112. And those are the 2 schools that are really driving the need to look at providing some capacity relief. And you look further in to schools further in town, and those schools are operating in the 80s and in the 90s, and some of them are even operating close in below 80, 65%. So trying to bring things to more of a balance and have things be somewhat close to 88%, but then also be mindful of future growth potential. So if you look at this data, you could see the big differences in utilization of your current enrollment of your buildings. And then the recommendation brings things much closer into balance and has things much closer in relation to each other. Another thing that we've provided in the tables for our analysis and for your information is what we call a trend line. And the trend line basically shows a flat bar if the students who are inside the school already, there are relatively even class sizes. And that means that as a class ages out, another one's coming in, and they're going to be relatively stable. But sometimes you may see larger class sizes aging out into middle schools and smaller class sizes coming in. In that case, you're looking at a downward trend. Enrollment's going to decline as bigger classes age out and smaller classes kind of fill those spots. Likewise, if you have a small class that's moving its way out and bigger classes are taking its place, that's indicative of an upward trend. So a growth trend. So we look at that as we monitor these data to try to see where we're at and where we may need to make some adjustments if an area is growing or declining. The important note about this is this doesn't factor in new home construction, which we kind of layer on top of what we're looking at here and try to be as proactive as possible. This guides us to make other adjustments as we look at other components such as new home construction. We have our middle schools here, and you could see Ben Steele Middle is at 111%, and so they definitely have the need for relief. And then the option, we do bring those schools into better balance of utilization, and also looking at enrollment numbers of the buildings. The high schools, you are seeing probably the most overcrowding in your high schools, and so we have made adjustments to align with the feeder patterns, and also to try to bring some further relief to West High School, if at all possible. And so that's what we have made adjustments to try to bring some relief to that school, but not making substantial changes. Again, as Superintendent Upham said, moving as few students as possible, trying to accomplish this, but give relief to schools that need it the most. You'll see other data in the handout that we have provided that shows the number of students impacted. So as per this recommendation, we're looking at elementary students, 679 elementary students could potentially be impacted, 467 middle school students, and 184 high school students. Keep in mind, these are impacts without looking at students who opt to grandfather through and other provisions that will be made by the district. If you look at this too, you could see the tan colored lines on the table shows you areas that are moving and how many students and where they're moving to. So in the first example, you see Big Sky sends some students to Central Heights, and they send 39 students to Central Heights. Boulder sends 12 to Arrowhead. And so you could see kind of how the adjustments are being made, where the kids are being moved to, and how many students are being moved in the recommendation. We've been looking at feeder patterns, and this is what I was talking about, that progression from elementary to middle and middle to high school. So we have been made adjustments to align with feeder patterns, trying to keep the feeder patterns as minimal as possible, try to have as many 100% as you possibly can. And this was a challenge, trying to keep things balanced. There is a small split you see at Miles going to Ben Steele. And a couple reasons for that small percentage that you see in the recommendation is that is an area that's expected to, that's one area that has 167 homes that are being built in that particular area. And we did some math looking at yields, and we anticipate probably about 40, 50, maybe 60 more students coming out of that. And so that area is currently building out. There are a few homes in the area already built. And as that builds out, we anticipate that number to go up and to get much better balance between the three schools. We considered that area going east, but it's closer proximity to Ben Steele. And so as it currently sits, it wasn't, the adjustment was not made, and that split still exists. But we have been monitoring and studying the splits, trying to make sure that we're mindful of the impact and trying to balance the splits as much as we possibly can. So members of the public have an opportunity to participate in this process moving forward in many ways. Tonight's presentation will be shared with the public. We are recording this presentation, and a copy of it will be posted on the district's webpage. There's also a link to the interactive map that members of the public can go and look and see how the recommendation shapes up from all 3 levels. We have a handout that has all the detailed statistics that I kind of gave you a briefing on tonight are in the handout. And then most importantly, there is a online feedback form that the district has built to get some input from the public. Once recommendation is delivered, this is a method for the public to go online and tell us some of their information, where they live, what school they're affiliated with, and tell us their thoughts. And this information will be continually studied and monitored. And this is going to stay up all the way through the Christmas holiday, and it probably stay up through the whole course of the study. And we will be pulling it down as we get back to the table and looking at if any changes need to be made, or as we revisit the draft recommendation. As I said, this is going to be recorded and YouTubed so that you'll have a clip that members of the public can go back and watch this as well. And members of the public can always attend board meetings and provide input at the board meetings as well. So that's all I have, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Trustee Von Langen. Sure, Chair. I have one question for the superintendent. How much are we as a district spending on the study?
I don't know, Brenda.
That would be a question that we haven't received an invoice.
Yeah, I can get that to you, John. Thank you. Trustee Tarakitis.
So not to harp on this too much, but tell me again the timing. We have a lot going on in the district right now, and I understand that there's pressure in these particular schools. Having visited one recently in Boulder, that's probably the primary conversation we had during the visit, was just A, how busy they were being, and B, how it's probably going to take the biggest hit for parental frustration of any sort of move out of that school. But what is the priority for this spring versus
Everything.
right?
No, so part of the urgency is, right now we're having to, so say at Meadowlark, we're busing overcrowded, overflowing students at Meadowlark because we don't have the capacity to house all of the students. Or we're now currently busing kindergartners to Burlington, Central Heights last year. So we have these overflow classrooms, and each year in August, Randy and I start to panic of, okay, where's our overflow classrooms going to be? How do we get transportation? We're dating and time stamping enrollment forms, and then we have to call parents, and then staffing, and then we're moving staff. And so it's a significant problem, in addition to, as we're seeing some of the challenges behaviorally, when you start putting large numbers of students in small spaces, that contributes to some of the challenges with behaviors, especially at the high school and middle school level, where kids are kind of on top of each other. And there isn't that space to be able to move freely, and it just compounds. For us, timing is important if we want to alleviate the overcrowding. If the board decides that is not a priority, then we will continue to do the best that we can. We have trying to meet our accreditation standards is a challenge. This can help with that as well, because then we can balance our class sizes out and still have the staffing efficiencies. As Matt talked about, and as I said earlier, we have upcoming enrollment for classes, registering for classes with our neighboring districts, our K-8 districts, and then within our own schools, that we want families to be able to make informed decisions. And we certainly don't want to be registering students for one school and then in April saying, just kidding, you're going to a different school now. That's very hard on families. And then for staffing purposes, as we start to staff the big jigsaw puzzle, we start that process in January and February. And it goes all the way through all summer, but we like to have it pretty well solidified by the 1st of May. And so these decisions have to be made prior to that, so that we can complete our work for the district.
I think it in the best interest of the district is to move as quickly as we can. If there's an appetite, we need to balance these schools. We've had them in this situation for now several years. You've heard the expansion at West, and Boulder is at where it's at, and Metal Arc is where it's at. So as far as the timeline is concerned, it would be nice to have a decision from the board in January, as long as the public feels that they're comfortable enough with that. So that interactive online component allows us to get access from the public that we haven't gotten before at that level. These maps are interactive, and so no later than February would be the goal. But January would be better because of the registration process that goes on in the spring.
Other questions?
With the grandfathering too, one of the things that we would also like to present for your consideration is not only if students are attending school there to be able to continue, but if a sibling is attending the school at the same time that their other sibling is, that they're allowed to leave that school, so that we're not splitting families. If a family wishes to go, that's fine, but certainly keep families together. It would not apply if there wasn't a sibling there. The sibling went on as a 5th grader to middle school, and incoming kindergarten would not qualify for the grandfathering. Rule. Also with the transportation, if a family chooses to remain at their school under the grandfathering provisions, if they're living in the district, they would be responsible for their own transportation.
Any other questions? Well, thank you, Mr. Cropper. Thank you, Ms. Koch. Appreciate it.
So what we will do is
Thank
we'll
you.
have the website live here in the next day or so. All of the information that was provided this evening will be on that website. It'll be a link on our main district webpage that community members can access the superintendent album discussed. And we'll also have the Google feedback form where they can choose what areas or area that they're representing, or just general, and then comments with that we can be sharing and using as we're continuing to refine, and we certainly will share that with you. Mr. Palmer can get that information.
Trustee Terkes. And we have additional marketing pieces in place to make sure families are aware that beyond just the meeting, it's going to be out. There's a plan to make sure that it's well publicized.
Yeah, we'll share this information in each elementary school, middle school, and high school also.
It's probably on Facebook right now. I would imagine it's just going out like wildfire, right? Social media.
And we understand the tenderness of this in schools. It's a challenge, it really is, but we can't exist in the same format. We need to make some adjustments. We need to make some boundary adjustments. So we'll do it as friendly and as efficient as we possibly can.
Trustee Hall.
Sorry. Question about the website. Is it going to be the primary, link? Will it be primary? What am I trying to say? Will it be centered prominently?
It will be up at the top of the web page where
Okay.
there's some specific links up there. There's like 3 boxes. It will be boxes up there. Brandon's going to name it, and we'll have, I think, 2022, 23 redistricting, reboundaries, something like that. So it's very prominent. Also under the link where the current school site locator is, where families can go and register, we'll have a link that will move them back up to that other link so that they can access the information. I also wanted to share too the numbers with the high school enrollment. All the utilization was over 100%. We do need to keep in mind that that is assuming no students are attending the Career Center. So throughout the day, students from each of those schools are at the Career Center, which does reduce that enrollment at an existing enrollment within the building. So it brings it closer down to a more manageable percentage. And Mr. Russell and I have Career Center enrollment numbers to share.
I guess the last question, is this going to go out in the superintendent email as well?
Yes. Other questions? Again, thank you very much, Mr. Superintendent.
Sure, and that Chairman McCullough concludes my report.
You do have the baseball.
That is